Welcome to SBS News in Easy English. I am Stephanie Corsetti. A 2-year-old child from Sydney has died at a Westmead hospital from a COVID-19 infection. New South Wales has reported 3 other deaths, including 2 women and 1 man aged in their 70s, 80s and 90s. The state has recorded 14,970 new COVID-19 cases, 1,163 people in hospital, and 34 patients are in intensive care. In Victoria, there are 7,531 new infections and no new deaths. There are 248 people in hospital, including 20 in the intensive care unit, and 5 patients on ventilators. And the ACT has 898 new infections, no deaths, 39 people in hospital and 4 people in the ICU. New South Wales paramedics are taking industrial action for 24 hours by refusing to leave their posts to fill gaps at other ambulance stations. It's part of a union campaign to improve emergency responder staffing and pay. The union is pushing for an extra 1,500 paramedics, which it argues are needed to address deteriorating response times from ambulance services across the state. It also wants a paramedic payment and a pay rise of more than 2.5%. Australian Paramedics Association New South Wales President Chris Castellan says staff are demanding a better resource service, a fairer workplace and improved coverage and care for the community. 9 victims of the recent flooding in the New South Wales town of Lismore have dumped flood-drenched household goods outside the Prime Minister's official Sydney residence. The group says it is taking action outside Kirribilli House to protest against Scott Morrison's handling of the flood crisis. They say Mr Morrison has failed again, while the Prime Minister says the government is working on the rebuilding of communities.
We've worked together to both respond to the terrible floods that have been experienced here in southeast Queensland and the recovery, clean-up and operations that are well underway.
Mr Morrison has promised to spend money to overcome bureaucracy and help flood victims in both New South Wales and Queensland. And the New South Wales government has announced an independent inquiry into the state's devastating floods. Retired Police Commissioner Michael Fuller and engineer Mary O'Kane will lead the inquiry. The investigation will examine the state's preparedness, recovery and response to the recent flood emergency that has killed several people and displaced thousands. An interim report is due by June 30th. To sport, the Gold Coast Suns have beaten the West Coast Eagles in Sunday night's Round 1 match. It was the Suns' first win against West Coast in Perth in 10 attempts, with the Suns securing 7 of the last 8 goals to seal the victory. Gold Coast head coach Stuart Dew has praised midfielder Matt Rowell.
The execution can be off, you can make some mistakes, but in the end, when it's a tight game, it's who's got the biggest heart, and we all know how big Rowley's heart is when it comes to competing.
This is SBS News in Easy English. Thanks for joining me. I am Stephanie Corsetti.
Welcome to SBS News in Easy English. I'm Amy Hall. Relatives, friends and colleagues of passengers on a China Eastern Airlines flight that crashed into mountains in Guangxi have gathered at Guangzhou Airport. The plane had 132 people on board when it crashed, but local media say there are no signs of survivors. It was travelling from Kunming in Yunnan province to Guangzhou when it quickly lost height. The airline says it deeply mourns the passengers and crew, but has not confirmed how many people have been killed. Mr. Yan is a colleague of Mr. Tan, who was on the plane when it crashed.
他的心情是非常的复杂，然后接到电话的第一时间，他就是
His relatives had very mixed feelings when I broke the news, and they were sobbing. His mother didn't believe this had happened. After I confirmed the news to her, she was sobbing. Then she said she will be here as soon as possible.
The Russian military says it has hit a shopping centre in Kyiv because it was allegedly being used to store rockets. At least 8 people are reported dead after the Russian missile strike. Russian officials claim Ukrainian forces used the shopping centre to reload multiple rocket launchers and store weapons to shell Russian troops. Those claims are yet to be verified. The federal government says the major telecommunications companies have to do more to make sure their infrastructure works during natural disasters. The government has announced it will spend almost $500 million in this year's federal budget on making NBN speeds faster in rural and regional Australia. But there have been complaints about communications infrastructure not working in rural and regional areas after natural disasters. Infrastructure Minister Bridget McKenzie says while the government has the money to help fix that, it can't be expected to do it all.
Telstra, Optus and other telco providers need to make sure that their infrastructure works in a natural disaster. This is Australia. This will not be the last time we see a flood. It will not be the last time we see bushfire or cyclonic activity.
Victoria's Education Minister, James Merlino, says another 60,000 air purifiers will be sent to government and low-fee non-government schools from today. That's on top of the 51,000 units already given to schools since the start of Term 1. Mr. Merlino says it's the largest investment in school ventilation in the country.
We know as we head into the colder months, windows get closed, doors are shut to provide comfort for students and teachers, but that means that those classrooms then become high-risk settings.
Victoria has recorded 9,594 new COVID-19 cases, 7 more deaths, and 256 hospitalisations. In New South Wales, there are 20,960 new infections, 4 further deaths, and 1,177 people in hospital with the virus. And a Victorian state memorial service for cricketer Shane Warne will be held on Wednesday night at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Premier Daniel Andrews says free tickets to the memorial will be available for booking from 3 p.m. today. The government says the service is an opportunity for Victorians to pay tribute to Warne's contribution to sport, the state and the country. It will also be live streamed. I'm Amy Hall. This is SBS News in Easy English. Welcome to SBS News in Easy English. I'm Amy Hall. Women's world number 1, Ash Barty, has announced her shock retirement from professional tennis. The 25-year-old, who hasn't played since winning the Australian Open women's title in January, made the announcement in a video posted to Instagram. She says she's thankful for everyone who supported her in her career.
I'm so grateful to everything that tennis has given me. It's given me all of my dreams plus more, but I know that the time is right now for me to step away and chase other dreams and to put the rackets down.
People living in flood-devastated areas of New South Wales who are still cleaning up from heavy rain more than 3 weeks ago are being warned that more potentially damaging weather is on the way. The Bureau of Meteorology is predicting at least another week of heavy rain and thunderstorms along the east coast, from Sydney, the Hunter, and up the mid-north coast to the northern rivers. The Bureau's Jackson Brown says the bad weather is expected to begin this afternoon, with storms and rain continuing at times for a week.
If we're having a look a bit further in time, you can see that trough advancing further up to the north, detaching over the northern rivers. And by Friday, we're looking at quite a lot of rainfall starting to occur over parts of northeastern New South Wales.
Federal Labor leader Anthony Albanese says there won't be an inquiry examining claims that the late Victorian Senator Kimberley Kitching was bullied while in office. Mr Albanese says an inquiry isn't needed, despite growing calls for an investigation, including by former Labor MPs. He's told the Nine Network that Senator Kitching would have wanted the party to move on and dedicate itself to a Labor victory at the federal election.
There were no complaints put in any formal sense at all about issues. The one issue that was raised was Kimberley's position on the Tactics Committee.
New South Wales has recorded 24,115 new COVID-19 cases and 5 further deaths. There are 1,162 people in the state's hospitals with the virus, including 44 in intensive care. Victoria has reported 10,471 new infections and 11 more deaths. There are 243 COVID-19 hospitalisations in that state, 23 in the ICU, and 4 on ventilators. Meanwhile, 19 Tasmanians with COVID-19 were incorrectly told they had returned negative PCR tests. The Health Department says the error was corrected within 3 hours. Tasmania's Health Commander, Catherine Morgan-Wicks, has apologised for the mistake. And more than 42,000 people will pay their respects to Australian cricketer Shane Warne at his state memorial service. The 52-year-old died in Thailand of a suspected heart attack on the 4th of March. His memorial will take place on the 30th of March at 7 p.m. at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews says there are still tickets available to attend the service. I'm Amy Hall. This is SBS News in Easy English.
Welcome to SBS News in Easy English. I'm Greg Dyett. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called on people around the world to show support for his country by protesting in the streets. Mr. Zelensky says Russia's actions in Ukraine represent a war on the freedom of people around the world. Another 11 people with COVID-19 have died in Victoria, while the state has recorded a further 10,259 new cases of the virus. There are 244 people with COVID-19 in hospital in the state. And in New South Wales, 8 more people with coronavirus have lost their lives. That state has recorded 24,803 new infections, with 1,180 people with COVID-19 in hospital. And Tasmania has recorded a further 2,009 new COVID cases. Pharmaceutical company Moderna has confirmed it will establish a manufacturing facility in Melbourne. Moderna Chief Executive Michael Azrak says he expects it will create up to 150 skilled jobs.
It's a landmark occasion for Australia, for Moderna, our medical research community, and our high-tech industry.
The federal government will establish a new national register for convicted terrorists. 144 people have been charged in 71 counter-terrorism-related operations around Australia since 2014. Home Affairs Minister Karen Andrews says the register will be for terrorists currently serving prison time, with 18 due for release in the next 4 years.
So we have passed relevant legislation to make sure that we can either keep these people in prison for longer, or in the event that they are released, that they can be subject to extended supervision orders.
Jamaica is set to become the second Caribbean island to leave the British Commonwealth. Jamaica gained its independence from the United Kingdom in 1962 after 300 years of British rule, but remained within the Commonwealth. Jamaican Prime Minister Andrew Holmes says his nation intends to leave the Commonwealth after Barbados did so last November. The Royal Australian Mint, which is the organisation that makes Australia's money, has released a new $2 coin that honours frontline workers who have played a key role during the pandemic. The coloured coin features workers including doctors, nurses and paramedics, as well as teachers, cleaners, retail workers and contact tracers. 2 million of the coins will be released over the next few weeks. New research by the Property Council of Australia has revealed almost 70% of voters fear younger people will never be able to buy a home in the country. Property Council Chief Executive Ken Morrison says Australia's political parties need to address the challenge.
We want to see the federal government and the federal opposition come up with plans which are going to address these issues.
I'm Greg Dyett, and this is SBS News in Easy English. Welcome to SBS News in Easy English. I'm Greg Dyett. Australia's Vaccine Advisory Group has officially recommended a 4th vaccination as part of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. Health Minister Greg Hunt says it will be available as part of the rollout for 4 groups from the 4th of April. The 4 groups include those aged 65 years and over, Indigenous Australians aged 50 years and over, residents in the aged care or disability sector, and immunocompromised Australians aged 16 years and over. Mr Hunt says the winter flu shot program will also be launched from early April, which aims to reach 5 million Australians.
Similar groups, actually. Adults, 65 years and over. Children, under 5. Pregnant women. Indigenous Australians of all ages. And people with particular immunocompromised medical conditions as well.
New South Wales has recorded 23,702 new COVID-19 cases and 7 deaths. And Victoria has reported 9,244 new cases and 9 deaths. Throughout the pandemic, 4.2 million coronavirus cases have been recorded in Australia, and there have been more than 5,800 deaths. Australia has extended its sanctions over Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, with a new set of measures targeting the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, his family, and a further 22 people, including senior editors at Russia Today. Foreign Minister Maurice Payne says Belarus must be sanctioned for providing support to Russia and its military during its invasion of Ukraine. She says the Australian government has now sanctioned a total of 32 pro-Kremlin individuals. The United Nations says more than half of the country's children have been driven from their homes by the relentless Russian bombardment of Ukrainian cities. In total, more than 10 million Ukrainians have fled their homes. An estimated 1.4 million Ukrainians have no access to safe water, and 4.6 million have only limited supplies. Indigenous traditional owners in the Northern Territory are celebrating the return of nearly half of Kakadu National Park. Elders say it has taken 45 years to complete the massive